So you're thinking of grinding a heavy tank in World of Tanks, but you don't really know which line to go down. In this video, I'm going to go through all of that. I'll be taking you through what I feel you should be grinding in late 2023, starting into early 2024. Starting out with the Super Conqueror. Obviously, the Super Conq. What else is there going to be on a top 5 heavy tank list for this game? The Super Conqueror is one of the best tanks overall in the game for heavy tanks. Even some of the reward tanks can't even come close to just the sheer performance of the gun that is on this tank. I would go as far to say that this is the best heavy tank gun in the game. You have 259 standard pen, 326 premium pen, very good DPM at 2.7, nearly 2.8k base, meaning that you could get this up to well over 3,500 DPM without vents on this vehicle. Speaking of which, you probably don't really want vents unless it's a city map, because the best equipments are going to be HP, improved hardening, turbo, and a rammer. Because this vehicle doesn't really get anywhere too fast. It has 34 km/h top speed, and obviously with a turbo, you can put that up to 40 km/h if you're using Bond turbo, or 39 if you're just using a regular one. So turbo is kind of a must on this vehicle, unless you're in Himmelsdorf, in which case then maybe you could switch out that for vents. Thinking about the other two pieces of equipment, they're not really going to go anywhere. HP, not just because it gets a decent enough standard health of 2,400, and then obviously with a HP boost, you can boost that up to all the way over 2,700, but mainly for the track health. And that is why a lot of people will use HP, and why I would recommend HP on basically every heavy tank in the game, especially at tier 10. Because not getting tracked on the first shot is way more valuable than any other piece of equipment, other than rammer. So you're probably going to see HP through a lot of these top 5 tanks, and that is the reason why. And obviously a rammer, because this already gets very good base DPM, boost it up even more, because why wouldn't you? I'm not going to go like deep dive into any of the stats on these tanks. I'm just going to talk about how they feel and just what they're like to the average player. Because the S-Conq gun is one of the best guns in the game, as I've already mentioned, and you get very good soft stats on this gun. You don't need V-stab to be able to flick and, you know, pen people or shoot people at quick snapshot. Everything is just beautiful on this tank. It just works. Even if you don't have an extremely very good crew, and you are someone that does play free to play, doesn't fire that many premium rounds, and just has a very mediocre crew, this tank is still going to work out very well for you, even without V-stab. Not to mention 400 base view range, so you're never going to really feel like you're being outclassed by different people at distance. Even some medium tanks don't get 400 base view range, which is mental. So you will be able to outspot people even if they're mediums sometimes. All in all, this tank is just a very good complete package, and why it is one of the best tanks in the game. Now moving on to the 60 TP, and this is a bit of a different tank from the Super Conq. Yes, it is still classed as a heavy tank, and even though that it doesn't weigh as much as the Super Conq, it feels a lot bigger and a lot more meaty. It gets a 750 alpha damage shell with 250 standard pen and 317 heat as the premium pen. It is not very accurate at only 0.38 as its base dispersion, and the actual dispersion factors on the move, so the soft stats, are really not very good, so you will want to have a V-stab with this tank. Everything else on this tank is okay to very good. It does get 2,600 standard health, and then you can obviously increase that with field mods and a HP boost, and you could go all the way to over 3,000 HP on this vehicle. The only thing that you really need to worry about with this vehicle, and partly with the S-Conq as well, but not to as much of a degree, is the ammo rack problem on the 60 TP. Because this ammo rack loves getting detonated. If you get hit at with a very high caliber shell and they've got Deadeye, you may get your head blown off. Not to mention, the ammo rack is situated right below the turret and at the very back of the turret, so it can be very easy to get hit there. And chances are, if you do get hit there, you are getting it damaged at least. Which is why I would always recommend people to either run safe stowage on this vehicle, as its directive. Alternatively, you could run config on this vehicle if you wanted to replace the HP boost. Apart from that, the equipment is going to be roughly the same to what you would want on other tanks. You want to have the rammer, and of course the V-stab. Now, even though that this thing does go extremely slow at 35, there is no real room to put a turbo on this tank. you need the V-Stab, you need the rammer, and you need to have either HP or any of the others that I've mentioned. So there's no real room for you to put on a turbo in this vehicle, unfortunately. It does have 390 meters view range, which is very, very nice, meaning that you don't need coated optics or vents or anything like that to actually get to that 445 meters view range, making this overall one of the most comfy 750 alpha damage tanks in the game. Now moving on to the 277. This is a little bit of a change of pace from the other two tanks, and it doesn't get the alpha damage that the 60TP has, and it definitely doesn't get the DPM that the Super Conq has. However, it sits in between those two. It has 490 alpha, 265 millimeters of standard pen on the AP rounds, which is really, really good for free-to-play players, and 340 heat rounds, making this by far the best gun out of all of these tanks. At least for penetration-wise. Obviously, the S-Conq is still the best overall. At 0.38 dispersion and 0.27 aim time, it's really not very good. It's very, very troll, and it will be very, very derpy. But considering that the soft stats are okay, you still need V-Stab on the tank, but at least it's not as bad as the 60TP. It does go at 55 kilometers an hour, making it the fastest out of all of these tanks that I'm going to speak about today, and gets 2,200 hit points. Meaning that, yes, of course, you're going to be wanting to run HP boosts on this to get to around about 2,400 hit points. Now, this tank does also have 400 meters view range. Combine that with the 55 kilometers an hour top speed, meaning that you can get into positions early game to get some easy damage done. And then you can fall back to a little bit of a safe location if need be. It makes this tank a lot more flexible than the others, and you can really move around the map and actually outposition a lot of people, and they just don't expect it. Not to mention that this tank is a very, very low profile vehicle. It doesn't get insane camo or anything, but it is very, very nice when you are in those kind of hold down situations, and the rubble pile is maybe only good enough to hide a lower plate, whereas with this vehicle, you could hide the lower plate and a little bit more because of how low down it is. Obviously, equipment for this vehicle is going to be HP, rammer, stab, and I wouldn't really recommend anything other than that. Obviously, you want the HP for the track health and also for the extra health that you will gain. Rammer, because obviously DPM is a must in any fight. If you are just shooting slower than the enemy that you are against, you are going to lose that fight. And considering that in certain situations you could go ahead and play it like a little bit of a medium tank, getting your DPM up as much as is possible is a must-have. And of course, finally, the stab, because nobody likes missing shots. Overall, this is probably the most flexible vehicle out of the 5 that I'm going to talk about today. However, it definitely does have drawbacks. Gun depression isn't great. You can't go hold down and expect to have amazing gun depression like you can in the Super Conq. So there's definitely that to consider. And it really can't side scrape as well because of the way that the hull's shaped. So a few things to take into consideration if you are thinking about getting this tank. Next up, the T57 Heavy, the only autoloader on this list. And this is because it is the highest base DPM out of all of these tanks. Yes, a autoloader has the highest base DPM. And you cannot mount a rammer. And even when you do mount a rammer on these other tanks, they still don't come sometimes even close to the T57 DPM. 3,096 base DPM. Without a rammer, without any other things, this is base. 1,600 interclip reload, 0.35 dispersion, and 400 alpha with 258 standard pen. That is insane. Not to mention that you get 340 heat rounds on this vehicle. The only thing is, it will go through it quite fast. Now, because there is 3000 DPM as standard, the problem with this tank is that it doesn't get enough shells to actually sometimes even last the entire game. You get 36 shells, which means that the actual kind of loadout that you may be willing to take, there's no kind of space for HE in this vehicle. Now, HE is not really something that I've spoken about in any of these, because you kind of just take it if you want it on the other vehicles. Like, sure, S-Conq has a good HE, 60TP has good HE. I mean, 277 doesn't have great, but whatever. This tank, even if the HE was good, and I mean, it is 60mm of pen, it doesn't matter because you can't afford to take it. Now, I like to take something like 12 AP rounds and then 24 heat rounds, but you could easily go with 20 and 16. Whatever you decide to take, just know that you are going to go through them very fast. The other problem with this tank is that the soft stats on the gun are really not very good. It gets very bad soft stats, and you are going to need V-stab on this. Just like the 60 TP and the Super Conk, it goes at 35 kilometers an hour. I mean, it's roughly the same as those three, so all three of these are roughly the same. And it's one of those tanks where you really want to have turbo. So, although vents, yes, you could put it on this tank and get the DPM up even more, HP turbo stab is probably going to suit you better. Not to mention, the reverse speed on this vehicle is abysmal at 14 kilometers an hour. So as soon as you quickly dish out your clip, you're then going to be retreating rather slowly if you don't have turbo. So that is why I'd recommend HP turbo stab for this. Everything else on the vehicle is pretty nice. It gets 2,250 hit points, slightly more than the 277 at 50 more, and you do get 400 meters base view range, exactly the same as most of the others apart from the 60 TP. Now there is one more thing to mention, along with kind of the same lines of the S-Conk, it does get ammo ranked, however not nearly as badly as the 60 TP does. But overall, this is by far the best heavy autoloading tank that you can get your hands on. Yes, it's better than the 50B. They don't really play similar though, so it's hard to compare the two. But if you want the true brawling heavy tank, this is it. And lastly, the IS-4. This is probably the most idiot-proof tank on the list. Because if you manage to get yourself up against someone that doesn't know how to pen you, you will just sit there in front of them and bounce everything. It doesn't get good DPM. It doesn't get good dispersion, but it does get the best armor out of all of these tanks. Gun-wise for this tank, it is a 440 alpha damage gun. It has 258 standard rounds with 340 heat rounds. 0.42 dispersion, which means that it is going to be very, very annoying at times and will just go nowhere close to where you aim it. Soft stats are okay. You can work around them. They are not bad, and you can forgo the V-stab on this. Some people might not want to, and that's completely fine as well. You do go at 43 kilometers an hour top speed, but don't expect to get to that, because the terrain resistances are pretty awful on this tank. Now of course, once you do get all the cruise skills and you get off-road driving and things like that, then yes, you will be able to go at the 43 kilometers an hour top speed, especially if you use food. But don't expect to be on medium terrain and get into that 43 kilometers an hour. It just will not happen. Even though on paper, you will be getting better mobility than a T57 Heavy and the 60 TP and the S-Conk. In reality, it's probably going to be closer to an S-Conk and maybe even worse than an S-Conk once you get into game. So just keep that in mind. This is a very, very slow tank, but at the same time you do get completely stupid armor. This is also not a very heavy tank. Even though they've been bolted on with loads and loads of armor, it isn't as heavy as an S-Conk, it isn't as heavy as 60 DP or even the T57. The only thing that's lighter than this vehicle is the 277, but that doesn't translate very well because the engine power is just not there, so you're never really going to reach that top speed as we've already mentioned. So don't be afraid to ram into this thing if you do see it, because the chances are you're probably heavier than it. It does get 400 meters base view range, much like all the rest of these, and you do get 2,500 hit points, meaning that yes, you can get all the way up to nearly 2,900 hit points with HP and of course the field mods. The massive drawback of this tank is the ammo count. 30 shells total. Because of the reload time being quite low with the 440 alpha, those shells will disappear very fast, meaning that you don't really have that much choice when it comes to your ammo loadout. It can be very, very annoying. There's some games where you wish that you had less heat, there's some games where you wish you had more heat, and you can always find yourself in that kind of situation of, I wish I had this, I wish I had that. Not to mention that the HE would be nice to use, but you can never really take more than 2 or 3 at most. Even then, that's debatable, you might not even want to take any. So this tank can be incredibly frustrating to play, as you can see. Yeah, it runs out of ammo. So there we go. That is my top 5 tanks that I would recommend grinding in World of Tanks. Late 2023, early 2024. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching. You know what to do if you did enjoy. And I'll see you all in the next video.